Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to be here tonight, especially as a Fellow of the Royal Society, because you probably all know that the very first meeting of the Royal Society was held following a meeting here in 1660 when Christopher Wren gave a Gresham College lecture. So it's with great pleasure that I'm here tonight. And to talk about the role of nuclear power in achieving net zero. So, as well as quite a bit on the nuclear part of the topic, I'm also going to be concentrating very much on just how big a challenge we have in actually trying to get to net zero in terms of our carbon-related emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions. Because the requirement to simultaneously grow our energy supply dramatically globally and still to decarbonize it is an absolutely immense challenge for us, because fossil fuels still account for over 80% of global energy. So that's energy, not electricity. And I'll be differentiating between the two at various stages in the lecture. So we need to get on with achieving that massive decarbonisation when we're actually constrained by other environmental issues and the availability of raw materials and the volatility of global politics, which crop up during the talk. So we live in a rapidly changing world. We've got unprecedented geopolitics, and we're not in control necessarily of our energy security, our energy price, or the material resources which affect both of those issues. And that has loomed large in many of our lives, particularly since the war between Russia and Ukraine. So climate change has been on our radars for quite some time, manifested often with extreme weather events, from floods in Bedfordshire here in England, through to California fires, which made a great deal of news, and more recently in the United States, heavy snows and tornadoes being more frequent events in the States, through to Austrian flood damage, of the sort of damage that I saw in my locality in the northwest of England during Storm Desmond. Huge pieces of mountainside washed down, devastating villages, to floods in South Sudan where they would not necessarily be expected. So globally, whether it be in Pakistan or Germany or Italy or elsewhere in the world, we're increasingly seeing extreme weather events, and not always, but sometimes related to climate change. So why do we really care about whether energy is low carbon or not? Because we're warming up the planet, and for many years now, scientists have advised us that greenhouse gas emissions are one of the causes, and as a first world country, we have an obligation to set an example. But do we still care about this when we're choosing between heating our homes and feeding our children? So if we look at global emissions, you'll see from the slide that China and the United States are by far and away the larger emitters, closely followed by Russia and India. And we here in the UK, in common with a number of other countries, contribute about 1% to the overall global emissions. So it doesn't matter that we only emit 1%. What matters is that we're a first world country. We've benefited hugely from having the fossil fuel resources to bring our society up to the level that it currently is. And we have an obligation now to do our best to try and mitigate for the future the damage that would otherwise cause. So if we look at worldwide electricity mix, and we look at the role of nuclear power within that, currently nuclear runs at just under 10% of the global world electricity mix. So fossil fuels still account for very much of the majority of the global electricity supply. Renewables in the form of wind and solar particularly, even though there's been huge advances in recent years, still contribute a relatively small part of the global electricity supply. Now, in terms of nuclear fission around the world, there are 438 plants currently running in 32 countries, and the global power that they generate is just under 10%. There are quite a number of plants under construction globally, and many more planned or at least being talked about. And that's particularly so since the energy security issues posed by the shortage of gas as a result of the invasion by Russia on Ukraine. So we'll come back to those figures because we're talking about only around 10% at the moment. If we actually increase that to about 15%, which is under discussion in terms of nuclear's contribution to low-carbon energy, then we'd be talking about at least doubling the amount of nuclear power plants that are there globally. So if we take a slightly more detailed look, United States has by far and away just under 100 of the number of reactors that are running. France, too, has a significant portion of reactors at just under 60 that are running. We ourselves are quite small in the overall scheme of things, and some countries that don't have any nuclear plants do benefit from it. Italy, for instance, gets around 10% of its electricity from the French nuclear fleet, and Denmark actually gets around 10% of its electricity from the Swedish nuclear power stations. So some countries only have a very small number. Some only have singleton numbers. Others here at the top: United States, France, China, Japan, Russia, Korea, India, Canada, Ukraine. Ourselves at the moment, Sweden, Belgium, have the largest number. Germany, in fact, as of this week, hasn't got any nuclear power plants running. So in terms of the low-carbon contributors to the electricity supply, we're looking at nuclear power plants, wind, biomass, solar, marine in various forms. I just happen to have shown turbines there, and wind turbines. Biomass actually is not that clean in terms of carbon emissions, as you'll see in a minute. So if we look at the carbon contribution of the major sources of electricity, if we take the figures from the International Panel on Climate Change of 2014, then nuclear and wind have the lowest grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour generated, with hydro and solar relatively low. Biomass has very significantly more at 230 compared with 12 or 11 in terms of the grams of CO2 emitted. So without carbon capture and sequestration, then biomass actually is still contributing to the carbon contribution. Gas and coal obviously have very much more at 490 and 820 grams of CO2. More recent estimates have actually been made by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and they're giving slightly better figures for nuclear compared with wind and hydro. But basically, hydro, nuclear, and wind are the lowest forms of electricity generation in terms of carbon contribution. Sometimes people don't realise that nuclear energy has benefits that are additional to those from generation of electricity. And nuclear reactors are responsible for a number of the essential isotopes that surgeons use to both diagnose and treat conditions such as cancer. Iodine-131 is used to treat thyroid cancer, strontium-89, bone and prostate cancer, and not on the slide, but an up-and-coming isotope called actinium-225 is also showing great promise for prostate cancer treatment. And they're used in PET scan diagnostics and in bone scintigraphy. So they're needed on a daily basis. This is just an image showing someone with prostate cancer that's detected by the use of molybdenum-99, which decays to technetium-99m to enable the image to be seen. And these are needed daily, and so molybdenum-99 is needed to be imported for countries that don't have reactors that generate it every week. Most of the world's molybdenum at the moment comes from places like Australia, who doesn't have any power plants but has a research reactor that generates this material. Radioisotopes are also used to power some of our most extensive space missions. Radioactive power sources have powered the Curiosity Mars rover for 10 years, and Voyager, which is NASA's longest-lived mission, actually has been up there for 45 years in space, powered by radioactive power source. So that's just an extra feature that happens to come from nuclear power. Quite a lot of the talk that follows now is about the UK's specific position with respect to nuclear energy and its role in the journey towards net zero. So in terms of our existing power stations here in the UK, we generated last year and still run at about 15% of the electricity for the UK. And what I'd like you to note is the extensive reliance that we still have on gas on a yearly basis here in the UK. And that our main sources of renewables, wind and solar and hydro, are still relatively modest contributors in spite of the investments that have been made. So gas is still a key player and a key pillar of the UK's energy mix. And it's particularly important for electricity generation as well as its wider use for heating our homes and maintaining some of our key industrial processes. And it's likely to remain so well into the future, as you will see from some of the later slides. But it's beset with geopolitics. Now, way back, we used to have very significant quantities of oil and gas from the North Sea, so we were self-sufficient. But from the middle of the 2000s, the decade between 2000 and 2010, we'd become net importers of both oil and gas. At the moment, we only get about 40% from our domestic fields. We import 31% from the European pipelines, and we import 22% from LNG tankers that come mainly from the Middle East. So we have huge demand for gas, and we're net importers, which is why we're very beholden to geopolitical events that disrupt those supplies. Storage, we're not too good on that either. There's a lot of press associated with why on earth don't we have better storage for the gas that we need. And these were just some of the headlines back in 2021, even before the Ukraine war. But this gives an indication as to why we were so vulnerable. Here in the United Kingdom, we have much less gas storage capacity than most of the other European nations. Italy significantly more than us, Germany not far behind. And even countries like Austria and the Netherlands, with much smaller populations than us, have significantly better gas storage to be available as and when it's needed. I mean, I'm not commenting particularly on it other than to state that that's the way it is. Now, I'd recommend to you, I'm going to recommend to you two apps that you might use to look at where our electricity comes from. It tells you what's generating it at the time. This one is from an open source called electricitymaps.com, and if you can download it onto your phone as an app or onto your PC, and it basically throws up a map of the world, and the countries that supply the data enable the app to colour the country that you're interested in. So green is low carbon, brown black is high carbon. Back in October, we were brownish. Germany was slightly browner. And that was due to the fact that we were burning 61% gas at that time, and Germany was burning 30% coal. France is mainly green always because of the amount of nuclear power it has on its grid. Norway, mainly green because of hydro. Sweden has about 50-50 hydro and nuclear to keep it pretty much green. Poland is nearly always black. It's always black because its main power source is coal. But electricity demand varies widely during 24 hours, and particularly during the winter. That means that our ability to keep our lights on and our homes warm heavily depends upon us having gas available. This was a shot taken in January this year. Nuclear runs all the time when the reactors are on, as do the biomass sources. They normally only put coal extensively on the grid when we're really short of supply. Wind, as you can see, is variable. If it's there, it will be taken. If it's a low wind, then we just have to take more gas. In the winter, even on a sunny day, there is not very much solar, even though we have quite a lot of investment made in solar energy. So I'd like you to just remember the fact that our peak installed capacity, our peak drawdown is around about 40 gigawatts, because we're going to come on to why is that important. Because this is the maximum amount of nuclear that can be generated, and wind, as I've said, is variable depending on how much there is. This is just another way to show it and why it's important. On the 29th of November, this is another app that you could get from the National Grid. It's called ESO Nat Grid, and it gives the Great Britain generation mix. On the 29th of November, we were wholly and totally dependent on 66% gas, 13% nuclear, 3% wind. It wasn't a very windy day. Yet on the 10th of January, it was a very windy day, so we had 51% wind, again, 13% nuclear, and only 12% gas. But it means the gas stations have got to be there and available to come on quickly in order to make sure that we don't lose supply. So it's hard for our planners and our grid to run with a huge amount of wind on the grid, and to also maintain the gas stations available to run, and in some cases keep the coal stations on hot standby for times of low gas. Even in the summer, it's not always possible to rely on a lot of wind and a lot of solar. August last year happened not to be all that windy and not all that sunny in the overall scheme of things, so we were still heavily dependent on gas, which you wouldn't necessarily have expected. But if we go back to energy, and not just electricity, electricity is really embedded in this part of the talk, in the energy supply. If we're decarbonising, then we're going to decarbonise transport and decarbonise our residential homes, heavily dependent upon oil, petroleum products, heavily dependent upon gas, as is our business. So if we're going to move to electricity for cars and heat pumps for homes, then we're going to double at least the demand on the grid. So that 40 gigawatts installed capacity has got to be up towards 80 gigawatts installed capacity to maintain the power that we actually need. So it's going to be a big ask and a big challenge to get there. Now, the Committee on Climate Change, in many of its reports, has indicated that we ought to be able to do it with the technology that is available, whether that be wind, solar, nuclear, biomass with carbon capture and sequestration. But it relies on a concerted effort and action by all, because this is the power bit at the moment, the 40 gigawatts, and you're going to try and decarbonise a chunk of industry, our homes and our transport sector. So it is a massive ask to try and do that. And is it really possible, or will the lights go out as we try? Because there's huge engineering challenges in order to get us to where we need to be. Now, back in 2010, the Royal Academy of Engineering put together a report called Generating the Future. And it was to try and see what we needed to do at the time to get an 80% reduction in our carbon emissions, which is where we were targeting at the time. And so it suspended judgment in terms of cost. It just said, assume that the money will be available to do it. What is it physically possible to build to enable us to hit that target? And at the time, it did the analysis and engaged with industry to do it. It was felt that we could build many more large onshore turbines. We would need to build the equivalent of 38 London arrays, which are the big wind farms in the big wind farm in the Thames Gateway. We'd need a lot more in the way of solar voltaics. We'd need wave machines that were a bit like Polaris wave machines. We'd need tidal stream in terms of turbines. We'd need a barrage, many more hydro schemes, and we would still need either nuclear or fossil with carbon capture and sequestration, large plants, and we would need to reduce demand in order to meet that. So it was a huge engineering and industrial challenge. Oops, a bit too slow, there we are. So how have we done? This column was indicated the amount that we thought it was possible to build. This column, which is a bit lower, quite a bit lower for some of the technologies, is what the average amount actually produces. And this says what we've built so far. So we were aiming to build the best part of 60 plus gigawatts of wind technology. And in fact, we've only got on the grid, as we speak today, around 25. So in the intervening years, we are only crawling our way to what is required in terms of renewable technology. And we haven't built any nuclear power stations or fossil plants with carbon capture and sequestration. So we're a long way short of what we actually need to build. National Grid more recently has started to do some analyses of, how can we start to look at how we will get there. And they've done some analysis that they called a day in the life of 2035. And this particular diagram from their publication is about a day in the winter in 2035. And it will show you that they're assuming that we will still have 8 to 10 gigawatts of nuclear, which is by no means certain, which I'll come on to in a minute. We will have carbon capture and sequestration on fossil plants, which we haven't got. And we will have built by 2035 over 80 gigawatts worth of wind power. And we've currently only got 25. So it's a huge ask. But the other thing to note from this is the amount of actual energy and electricity you get from your quite modest 8 to 10 gigawatts of nuclear. You're actually getting 220 gigawatt hours of energy. And in terms of your offshore wind, in spite of the large amount that you have built, you're only getting roughly the same amount as you would with the nuclear station. And you will also see that Grid are assuming we will be able to import via interconnectors 400 gigawatt hours, which is by no means certain, because nations that are short of power for their domestic supply have a horrible habit of making sure their own population is properly served rather than fulfilling contracts that may or may not be in place. So it's assuming that if there's low renewable output, if there's not much wind and there's not much solar, then we're going to rely heavily on carbon capture and storage, which again, we have done very little to invest in, as well as some baseload nuclear power. So it's a huge, huge challenge that we're trying to meet. So various governments from the first decade of this century have indicated that they are in favour of allowing new nuclear power stations to be built in the UK. But they haven't necessarily followed that through with policy or action. We've had the 10-point plan for the Green Industrial Revolution, which was emphasising much more on renewable technologies like wind and solar, but also mentioning that new nuclear was important in the days of Boris Johnson. We subsequently had, as well as the 10-point plan, an energy white paper and a British energy security strategy last year, which re-emphasised the importance of nuclear energy in the UK's energy security landscape. So to be secure with our energy, nuclear was deemed to be necessary, and they required 24 gigawatts of generating capacity by 2050 in order to help us get to where we need to be with net zero. The expectation was also that the cost of nuclear energy would be significantly reduced from what it is today, and that we would do that with more novel designs and a different sort of technology. So, nuclear energy, as far as the government of the day in the UK is concerned, they would like it to continue to be a major contributor to the UK's low-carbon electricity, but how long is that going to be for? Because most of our existing stations will be gone this decade. They will have retired. Heysham and Hartlepool were due to retire in 2024. They've just been given 2-year life extensions each. But all of the what's called advanced gas-cooled reactors, which are the mainstay of our nuclear power in the UK and have been for many decades, they will all retire by the late 2020s, and only Sizewell B of the existing nuclear reactors will exist. It's kind of a bit unfortunate with hindsight that we chose this type of technology back in the 60s and 70s to be the mainstay of our nuclear power, because they have shorter lives than the global standard, which is a water-cooled reactor like the one at Sizewell B. These were developed by the Americans and then exported globally. And most of the rest of the world runs on water-cooled reactors. We didn't, and therefore we now need to build some new ones in order to maintain our supply of nuclear energy. So originally, we had ambitions for new build. EDF, the company which supplies quite a bit of electricity in the UK, French company, were going to deploy French technology at Hinkley Point in Somerset and at Sizewell C in Suffolk. Westinghouse, the American company, was going to deploy their latest designs at Moorside in Cumbria, and Hitachi were going to supply their designs at Wilfer on Anglesey. These two projects fell by the wayside, partly as a result of government interactions and cost concerns. So the only one that is currently underway at the moment is the EPR, the EDF built technology at Hinkley Point. But what was the rest of the world doing? Well, even before the Ukraine, the United States and France, the United States had begun a major push for new nuclear power stations to be built in their respective countries, and for the technology to be built, to be developed in America and in France. So they've made very serious policy interventions, whether they be very large grants and loans to get companies underway, or whether it's just a commitment to build more. This is President Macron in front of his workforce, outlining plans to have sorted out another 6 or 8 large reactors on the French grid, and to start the journey before 2030. So after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's been very significant additional steps taken elsewhere in countries that already have nuclear power plant by extending their lives or ordering new ones, or new countries that didn't have power plants to start with. So EDF has teamed with Italian partners on small modular reactor development. This reactor, which I'll say a bit more about, a BWRX-300, a 300 megawatt unit, developed by GE Hitachi, has been selected for Estonia as their first power plant. Contracts have been signed with Westinghouse for plants in Poland and the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic is also looking at small reactors. Canada has ordered a new small modular reactor and is working with Poland to deploy there. Poland has given record support for Japanese reactor restarts, and siting permits requested for slowback plants. French Ministerial Council has prepared for the new nuclear build and passed that it's gone through the French equivalent of Parliament, and the parties in Spain have already indicated that they wish to see nuclear plants go forward. And there's been changes to Swedish law to enable new nuclear power plants to be built. So why is it such a problem? And why does it seem to be a particular problem here? And it's because of the vast amount of cash that you need for the power plants before you actually get the electricity from it. So a huge amount of money, billions, you know, and that's been quite a challenge here in the UK, particularly for the ones that we've chosen. But it's quite often, well, it's down to the capital that you have to borrow and its financing over the years of build before you get any of the power out. And that's what dominates the cost of the power station. If you're borrowing at 9%, then it costs very significantly more than if you're borrowing at government rates at 2%. Hinkley Point, the finance was borrowed at 9% rather than 2%. But it's not just that, it's the reactors themselves. You'll see the reactors, the actual nuclear bit is only about 15% of the total cost. The structure and the shielding, the concrete and the rebar that go around all the reactor and everything that it hangs with is by far and away the thing that influences the cost of the power plant and the time that it takes to build. And that's why it's proving to be so difficult, especially here. Because Hinkley Point, of all the reactors that could have been chosen in terms of design, the EPR is probably the most complex and difficult to build on site of the available proven designs. This is the base mat for the Hinkley power station before all of the reinforcement was put around it. To give you some idea of the concrete rebar in the base mat, it's a huge, enormous civil engineering challenge to build this particular design of plant. This is a more recent picture with the shielding all up around. It's a photograph that EDF released in terms of the construction site. This is the pressure vessel that holds the actual fuel for the reactor being delivered to site at the end of February this year. So the pressure vessel will be being installed into the shielding that was shown on the earlier slide. Big challenge. But just to give you an idea, some of the other large plants are not quite such a big challenge. Westinghouse's AP1000 design was built at the Vogtle site in Georgia. These are units 4 and 3 on that site. And it's an easier plant to construct because of the modularity that has been in the design of the plant. So they're easier to build, but it also gives you an idea of the size of the pressure vessel. These are people here, and this is the thing that was on the barge going out to the Hinkley Point reactor. So you could probably fit 4 pressure vessels in this room. For nuclear reactors, and each one would be generating over 1,000 megawatts of electricity. So the power density in a modern reactor is incredible, really, in terms of the space that it takes up, given the power that it actually generates. So what next for us? Well, Rolls-Royce have been working significantly for a number of years on their small modular reactor. Now, by small, it's still 450 to 480 megawatts, so it's not very small, but it's smaller than reactors like Hinkley Point or the Vogtle plants in the United States at over 1,000 megawatts. But what they have done is actually design a power station rather than just a nuclear reactor. It's been relatively easy for a long time now to modularize the nuclear reactor itself. It's how do you modularize the rest of all the concrete shielding and all the other things that are needed to have a functioning power station. So they've built a fully functioning, they've designed a fully functioning power station with a great deal of modularization and factory build in all of the design elements. So it means that you can test off-site, you can build most of your modules off-site, and quality control them before shipping them for the final assembly on-site. Which is why it is so attractive and has received a lot of interest for the design that they've come forward with. It means that you'll be able to maintain a very high quality product and reduce on-site disruption, because the bigger units have a great deal of on-site disruption while you're actually building on-site. And the extent of modularization means that it will transform what would have been a very large, complex infrastructure program into a factory-build, commoditized product. So that's why it has the advantages that it has, and is likely to lead to a significantly less costly nuclear power plant. So in terms of our ambitions for new build, what might we see now? We still may see EDF deploying more French EPRs, because the government has several times announced that Sizewell will be a copy of the Hinkley Point reactor. Westinghouse may well come back into the UK with AP1000, which has not just experience in the United States, but also in China. We may see the General Electric 300 megawatt unit, that's this one here, or the Rolls-Royce Small Modular Reactor, our own UK design. We might, but probably, I don't know, maybe not. We'll see the other American design, the NuScale Small Modular Reactor, of the available light water reactors internationally. The NuScale design has had very significant support from the American government, and they're moving to build their first one on a site in Idaho. So these are the water reactors that are available today, are well proven in terms of design maturity, or already built and validated somewhere else globally. And that's important. It's really important that you're not just building a PowerPoint design thing, that you're actually building a unit that has very significant validation and verification and evidence that you can build it safely, it will run safely, and that the regulators will be comfortable with it. But what about the future? What might it hold for the longer term? Because there's a lot of talk now about not just small modular reactors, but advanced modular reactors. And these generally are based, there's not a lot new in the nuclear world in terms of the base technology. Many of these concepts were conceived back in the 1950s and 60s. It's just that they've never been brought to commercial reality globally, not just here in the UK. So there are a number that we might see going forward globally. This one in the centre is receiving a significant amount of attention. It's called a natrium, and it's going to be built first in the United States by TerraPower and General Electric, and it's heavily supported by funds from Bill Gates. So a lot of private sector funding as well as US government funding. And it's a 345 megawatt unit, but it also has a gigawatt scale energy storage system associated with it. So it can store up to 500 megawatts of possible electrical output for 5 to 6 hours. So it has big advantage in that not only is it going to generate electricity, it will also store electricity, which will then be available at a later point, or heat for industry to use. It's 4 times more fuel efficient than the current light water reactors, and it uses 80% less what's called nuclear grade concrete. So from the point of view of economics, it may well prove to be an economic possibility. These are the two, PRISM and ARC. These are also out of the General Electric stable and are based on technology that was developed back in the 1960s. Again, sodium-cooled fast reactors. Westinghouse are looking at a lead-cooled fast reactor, and they're also developing a high-temperature, what's called a micro-reactor. These reactors are only 2 to 5 megawatts in size, and they're mainly for off-grid applications, like somewhere remote where it's difficult to supply grid power. So these are big companies investing heavily in non-light water reactor systems that we may well see. Other systems that may well come to pass are molten salt reactors. A company called Moltex, initially in the UK, has been working on a molten salt reactor, which has the added advantage of not only producing electricity, but it can also produce heat because of the molten salt that is used as coolant. Or we have high temperature reactors being developed by X Energy, and there was a UK company, Urenco, that was developing a small micro high-temperature reactor, but it's now been absorbed into a Canadian company, Ultrasafe Nuclear Corporation. It was a pity because it was very good technology designed and developed here in the UK, but it's now been absorbed into USNC for them to take forward, and they're engaged in Canada in looking at how to take that one forward. So they're different. They have additionality as well as electricity generation, and they're modern versions of designs that were conceived many years ago. UK had high-temperature reactor back in the 1960s. It was at Winfrith in Dorset, and it was called Dragon, and it was one of the first reactors of that type built globally. But the technology was never taken forward seriously at the time, and we're only now just seeing high-temperature reactors come back into favour because they will give heat as well as electricity as part of their outputs. So what do we need to do? Well, it's a big question. It's not rocket science either. We need to use fewer bits. We need to take less time. We need to borrow the money cheaply, and we need to build more of the same type so that you get the economies of scale and the economies of repetition. And in many countries, their governments of the day set the energy policy and make it easy for technology to move forward. And once upon a time, our government set energy policy, and once upon a time, we had a central electricity generating grid, the CGB, that actually developed many types of electricity generation to keep our lights on and invested for the future. Because energy was too important to national security and security of energy supplies to just leave it to the international marketplace. But that's what we're doing at the moment. We're leaving everything to the international marketplace and hoping that companies will come along and develop the technology in the UK and deploy the technology in the UK. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is moving along, and they're all putting orders into the system. And so if we're not careful, we're going to be at the back of the queue for supply chain and for companies willing to come and build in the UK. I mean, things are moving along a little in that we have now got green label backing for nuclear technology, and this is similar to that that's been granted in the European Union, where the EU has recently given nuclear technology what's called transition. It's called it a transition technology to allow countries like France and Poland to invest in nuclear power plants and to help the negativity in Germany. So countries that want to can invest in nuclear energy, but you don't have to, and they've given it transition status. So here in the UK, for consultation, we've got green label backing. Canada already had that, which is why Canada was able to get private sector investment easily for deployment of the small modular reactor, the General Electric one in Canada. And Great British Nuclear has been set up and was launched at the time of the budget on the 15th of March when Jeremy Hunt presented his statements in Parliament. But does nuclear have a little bit of additional functionality in terms of can it be coupled with hydrogen to give us a different energy vector that will help? And the advantage that it has over the other renewable technology is the heat output because it gives stable electricity which allows electrolyzers to generate more efficiently, generate hydrogen more efficiently if there's heat as well. It's the only clean energy source that gives low carbon heat as a primary output. And heat can make the electrolysis process more efficient and thus cheaper. And the advanced reactors, which have high-grade heat, can actually give us thermochemical processes, and that could be the most efficient way to produce hydrogen. But there's none of these deployed as yet globally or here in the UK. And efficiency-wise, they'd be cost comparative and competitive with carbon capture and sequestration on fossil plant, but without the carbon emissions that you still get from that. So nuclear power, modern plants, coupled with potential electrolyzers for hydrogen generation. So in concept space, you could have a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor, both generating electricity and producing hydrogen and supplying hot gas to industry or hot steam to industry. It's a possibility, and it's being investigated in the United States down by some of the petrochemical companies that exist there as a means to enhance their processes. Okay, but there are many, many designs on offer globally. Some are just PowerPoint presentations. Some have a lot in the way of validation and verification. And what we've got to do is be careful that we actually have the machines that are validated and verified with a lot of work underpinning them. So what about fusion? I just want to say a few words about fusion towards the end here, because it's been under development for many years with huge, massive potential to be a really beneficial, clean source of energy. And here in the UK, we've had the JET programme, a European programme, at the Culham Laboratory in Oxfordshire for many years. And we're seeing investment now in the next generation STEP project, again, which is government funded. But we're also seeing private sector companies like First Light Fusion look at not just tokamak energy, fusion energy, which is this sort, but projectile and laser-based fusion energy, and making very significant steps forward with these technologies. And last December, we saw the news of the major fusion breakthrough at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in the United States, the National Ignition Facility, which gained energy and it proved that the technology was going to work. But there's a huge amount of engineering associated with delivery of that sort of technology. And these are shots of the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory with views into the target chamber, the beam lines on the top of the reactor vessel, the vessel itself, technicians loading the tiny targets, which are about slightly less than the size of my thumb. So a huge amount of engineering. And incidentally, they used the set of NIF on one of the Star Trek films. They used it as the basis for the warp core on the Enterprise. But both advanced fusion systems and advanced nuclear systems would do well to listen to the words of the very wise Admiral Rickover, who was the man who was the basis of the American submarine program, which then translated into the very successful reactor build program that the United States had. And he wrote a memo. And in that memo, which you can get the full copy of it on Google if you choose to get it, he basically said, an academic reactor or a reactor plant almost always has the following characteristics. It's simple, it's small, it's cheap, it's light, it can be built very effectively and quickly, and it's very flexible. It's an omnibus reactor, and very little development's required, and it'll mostly use off-the-shelf components. But it's in the study stage, it hasn't been built. And on the other hand, a practical reactor can be distinguished by the following characteristics. It's being built now, it's behind schedule, it requires an enormous amount of development on apparently trivial items. Corrosion in particular is a problem. It's very expensive, it takes a long time to build because of the engineering development programs. It's large, it's heavy, and it's complicated. So those messages still hold good to this day. And those making proposals for innovative concepts need to recognise the amount of work that has to go into either an advanced fission system or a fusion system, because it all has to be underwritten by decades of development and by the regulators who look after our safety and operate internationally. So, what's the role for nuclear power in achieving net zero? Will the lights go out without it? Well, I hope that you'll gather from the talk that I've given tonight, first of all, achieving net zero is a massive engineering challenge, and we have a huge journey still to go. And nuclear energy can and should play an important part, along with the other renewable sources of energy, in helping us to get to net zero. And if I take the words of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which highlights nuclear energy's green credentials, it's got the lowest life cycle carbon intensity of the electricity generating technology today. It's got the lowest life cycle land use of any electricity generating technology. And it's got the lowest impact on ecosystems of any electricity generating technology. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Before we go online for any questions, I'd be interested to take any questions from physical members of the audience. Let's go over here. Yeah.
That was very nice. Thank you very much. Which do you think is the way to go? Is it going to be big nuclear reactors or small nuclear reactors?
I think we'll actually need a combination of them both, because I think the requirements for the amount that we need is such that we need both technologies in order to get them built and to deliver the 24 gigawatts that we need in time, and also for the enhanced global supply. The small ones give grid greater flexibility, so have benefits that way as well as with the other benefits that they have. But I actually think we'll need to build both.
Is there a problem regarding waste management of nuclear fuel? And also, how does it compare in cost-wise with solar energy?
In terms of solar energy, for the modern systems, when you take all the processes into account that are required, then they'll be comparable with wind technology, which is actually cheaper than solar technology. In terms of the waste, it's true that countries that were early developers of nuclear power have what's called a legacy waste from the early days of nuclear power. But once fuel is removed from a reactor, then there are robust processes for containing it and then storing it prior to emplacement in a geological repository. So countries that didn't have an existing development program, countries like Sweden, Finland, are well along the way to having their fuel packaged and geologically contained. Because the amount of fuel that you use over the course of a reactor, the volume is not large. Here in the UK, if we build a new fleet of nuclear power stations, we will only add 10% to the volume of the waste that we already need to manage and consign.
Okay, I'm going to take at least one question online. A special shout out to Andrew Patterson, who has been particularly active in the Q&A, by which I mean he's not only asking questions, he's also giving the answers. So,
well, can I see the answers that he's given them, please?
But, I am going to pick up one of his questions, but before I do that, I wanted to just pick up one by Jill. And she asks, is there enough uranium globally for all the proposed nuclear power plants? Is it available from friendly nations, and how long will it last when we reach peak nuclear?
Most of the uranium that's available globally is in Canada and Australia, which are generally viewed as countries that are favourable from a geopolitical standpoint. Kazakhstan also has significant quantities of uranium. She's quite right to ask that question because for a large expansion of nuclear power, then at some point we will need to re-look at recycling the uranium that comes out of nuclear reactors. Most of the uranium that sits in a nuclear reactor is not used up and can be recycled and reused, particularly in the next generation of reactors, the fast reactors that I was talking about during the course of the lecture. So a resurgence in fast reactor technology will mean it's self-sustaining, and therefore we won't be dependent upon supplies of uranium. We'll have hundreds of years' worth of supply.
And I think, did you have a question, sir? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for a wonderful historic lecture. I'd like to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to expand a little bit on your comment about why Germany hasn't advanced its nuclear program, apart from the obvious historical reasons.
Well, the historical reasons still hold good. Germany has an interesting coalition from Green Party in Germany, which historically has been not in favour of nuclear power. And post-Fukushima, Germany decided to shut down its entire nuclear fleet. It kept the last 3 on as a result of... and they were perfectly good reactors that could have lasted another 20, 30 years. But politically, a decision was taken in Germany to close those down. So it's politics in Germany. German industry would not necessarily be in favour of that, but the politics in Germany have dictated that they no longer have operating nuclear plants on their soil.
Somebody has asked online whether your materials are available online. I should just take this point to emphasise that if you're new to Gresham College, everything is available online on the website. So the slides, there's a thing called a transcript, which isn't quite a transcript, but it's usually got very useful notes from the speaker, and the recording is available usually via YouTube after a few days. I have a question here from Stephen Roderick, who's online. He says, what's the key component of solar that gives it a carbon emission greater than that of nuclear, hydro and wind?
That, I'm afraid, I don't know.
It was a bit of a puzzle, wasn't it?
It'll be in the chemical processes, the manufacturing processes, and the materials that are used to produce the cells.
Yeah, it's the through life.
And it's
cost.
it's the life cycle cost.
Yeah. And we could probably take one more. A physical question. This gentleman here. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Graham. I'm a public affairs consultant in the energy space. The government, as you probably know, has set a target of 25% of electricity coming from nuclear by 2050. With all those stations going offline by 2030, do you think that's a realistic target, or is 25% too unambitious? Could it be higher?
It's not 25%, it's actually 24 gigawatts, which may be less than 25% by 2050. It really depends on what the final grid demand will be. It's hugely ambitious, but it's why, if we go to a combination of large reactors, like the AP1000 or EPR, and small modular reactors, then it is entirely possible to build that number by 2050. But we'll probably only see between 8 and 10 gigawatts by 2035, which was the assumption in the National Grid's analysis. But we need to start now. We need to get a wiggle on.
So that leads me to perhaps our final question, which is from Adrian Bull online. And he says, if we were going to follow the example of another country in terms of how they've developed nuclear, what should our role model be?
Well, I guess I would use the model of the UK all those years ago in the early days of nuclear power.
Old UK.
Old UK, yes. Where we had a sensible, balanced mix of technologies for our electricity. I mean, if you were asking me to pick, I would say somewhere between 25 and 30%, and the majority of the rest the other renewable technologies, wind, solar, with some, hopefully, developed carbon capture and sequestration on fossil to make up the balance. So that's a balanced energy policy is what we should have.
So we've run our hour, ladies and gentlemen, and the pressures of online mean that we need to stop. I'm going to give the final word to the great Andrew Patterson, who's been contributing so heavily online, and he says, note, I am a long-time fan of Dame Sue. She is top shelf all the way.
Well, that's very nice of you.
I couldn't
Thank you.
agree more.